a member of Irish rap group Kneecap, has appeared in court on a terrorism charge for supporting Hezbollah by displaying a flag of the terror group during a gig in London late last year. Liam O'Hara was welcomed by hundreds of supporters as he arrived at the court on Wednesday. It's, of course, not the first time the Belfast-based band has made headlines like this. They have been increasingly outspoken about the war in Gaza, and during the Glastonbury Festival in June, they led chants accusing Israel of committing war crimes. So now we bring in our UK correspondent, Jonathan Sachadotti. He joins us live from London. So, Jonathan, this Liam O'Hara was charged in May this year under the Terrorism Act. To be clear, Hezbollah is a proscribed organisation. We can see his attire as he walked into the Westminster Magistrates Court. Tell us more. What happened?
Today, Liam O'Hara, who goes by the stage name of Mo Chara, from the Irish rap group Kneecap, appeared before Westminster Magistrates Court. And he's there because he was charged under the UK's Terrorism Act for allegedly displaying a Hezbollah flag and voicing support for Hamas and Hezbollah during a November 2024 performance in London at the O2 Forum in Kentish Town. The charge is not about his political views on the Palestinians, but actually about his support for what is allegedly his support for a prescribed terrorist organisation. But his defence argued in the court that that charge should be thrown out because of a procedural error, specifically that the Attorney General's consent was granted after the police notification, missing the legally mandated 6-month deadline. And prosecutors countered that the consent was only required before his first court appearance, not before the charging. So far, not much has actually happened of any importance in terms of the actual case itself. But the judge, Chief Magistrate Paul Goldspring, adjourned the proceedings, and he said that he's now got to decide on whether or not he has the jurisdiction to hear this case, and he's going to do that by the 26th of September 2025. And in the meantime, O'Hara remains on unconditional bail and has not entered a plea.
I understand from reports that the band feels this move was intended to silence Kneecap. If he were to be found guilty of these terrorism charges, what kind of punishment or sentence would he be looking at likely?
The offence of supporting a prescribed terrorist group in the UK can carry up to 6 months imprisonment and or a fine. But some earlier coverage did mention a possible sentence of up to 14 years for this, but that's probably incorrect. That likely reflects broader severity of terrorism offences. So for this specific act, which is public display and support, it would be a 6-month maximum. So if he's convicted, that would be the legal maximum prison, or he could have a fine or possibly both, with any additional years being very unlikely for this. But certainly Kneecap are not the only ones who are trying to paint this as an issue of freedom of speech and support for Palestinian Arabs. Indeed, there were protests outside the court. Hundreds of supporters gathered in both London and in Dublin, waving Irish and Palestinian flags and chanting slogans such as "Free Mo Chara," which is his stage name. And the atmosphere was politically charged in both places, with crowds viewing this case as a broader matter of free expression and solidarity with the Palestinians. But of course, that's not illegal. He wouldn't have been arrested purely for that. The allegation is waving of a flag that showed support for a prescribed terrorist group. Thousands and thousands of people have shown their support for Palestinians in frequent marches and protests without breaking any laws and without showing any kind of affiliation or support for prescribed terrorist groups, which is the allegation in this case.
One could ask the question, pity they couldn't have led chants in support of British hostage Emily Damari, for example. We've heard the horrors she endured with all the other hostages at the hands of terrorists. But we wait to see what happens with that particular case. Jonathan, talk us through the concerns for the Jewish community in London right now with these kinds of public displays at concerts like you're describing, the anti-Israel protest action. What security steps are being taken right now? What are community leaders saying at the moment?
Well, broadly speaking, there are concerns over support like this for Hamas or Hezbollah. That's the allegation here. And displaying symbols or voicing support for such groups is deeply troubling for Jewish people and non-Jewish people, given those groups' violent histories and anti-Semitic motivations and their designation as proscribed terrorist organisations. So it naturally does raise alarm within the Jewish community and within broader communities. And this band is just one example, but their provocative criticism of Israel, including in their case messages like F Israel and up Hamas, up Hezbollah, these sorts of messages are alarming to Jewish people and to general Brits who don't necessarily feel that that is an appropriate way to behave in a cultural setting or in any setting. And Jews have felt many different kinds of discrimination and persecution over the last couple of years, in particular, since the October the 7th attack. There has been almost a tidal wave of anti-Semitism, which has, in some cases, been connected to or hidden behind ideas of pro-Palestinian action. But in plenty of others, the sentiment spills out, and it's very clear to people exactly what is underlying the various acts of intimidation or bullying or protest or even violence that Jews have been met with recently. And certainly the government's decisions in its statements supporting the establishment and recognition of a Palestinian state rather than in calling for Hamas to release the hostages sufficiently well. These sorts of things have only made Jews feel much more alarmed as well, that perhaps the authorities and the government aren't necessarily behind them. And a certain pattern of arrests as well has led many to believe that there is two-tier policing and that those who are against Jews and against Israel are often not as harshly punished or even arrested, whereas others, so to speak, on the other side are frequently arrested for things which they feel are quite unjustified. So certainly there is a lot of tension here among Jews and among non-Jewish people surrounding all of these issues.
An alarming situation indeed.